Hey guys, I'm down in the garden today like normal. We are in the middle of October and I feel like we're kind of unseasonably warm right now. It's got to be about 75, maybe even pushing 80 degrees right now. And our nighttime temps have been in the 50s, which is great because our first frost date is typically the 15th of October, but I think it's actually been pushed out until the end of October. So we may even make it to November without a frost, which is great because I still have a lot of dried beans behind me that I have to harvest. I still got to get my ginger out before that frost. I have a lot of seed saving items that I'm just kind of giving a little extra time to dry on the vines before I take those. So a little extra time would be great. But I came down to the garden today just to get a little bit of water on some things that I had planted, like my lettuces and onions. But a funny thing happened the other day, and I kind of wanted to bring y'all along for a little chat on this because I thought that it might be something that you might be interested in knowing because I was a little shocked by some of it. So anyways, let's get into that. Okay, so first, let me just start out by saying that I'm not completely in the dark on this stuff. I have seen it around. I just don't know that I've paid too much attention to it until just about a couple of months ago. But since we grow most of our own food here, I don't go to the grocery store that often. And when I do, I'm typically buying junk food. And I know that that sounds bad, but sometimes, you know, we want a bag of chips or my kids want a snack for our homeschool co-op. And, you know, there's some things that I just can't make here. And I'm not saying that they're healthy and fantastic because they aren't, but I think it's okay to indulge sometimes. So this is kind of what sparked this whole topic for me. The other night, Vincent asked if we could have tacos, and typically that would be a really easy dinner to prepare. But when you're making everything from scratch, including the tortillas, it gets, you know, everything takes time, basically. It takes a lot more time to get food on the table when you're making everything from scratch. So I have to now make those tortillas, you know, from flour and water and oil and all that stuff. It's just not as simple as grabbing them from the pantry, as much as I'd love to do that. But anyways, my husband thought that it would be, you know, nice of him if he just ran to the store without telling me. So he ran to the store, he got some tortillas, he got some white lunch bread, because I had not made any bread yet. And, you know, I mean, he knows that I've got a lot going on. He does too. And so he just thought, well, I'll just grab these things, we'll make it easier. Almost every item that he brought home had that bioengineered label on it. And, you know, it's so funny because Vincent said to me, you know, what does that even mean? And I said, well, basically, you know, the genetics have kind of been created in a lab, and it's just, you know, it's not something that would naturally grow in nature. And he said, can that give you cancer? Because I'm not sure if every teenage boy is like this, but that seems to be a question out of his mouth very frequently. Can it give you cancer? And I said to him, well, you know, they're experimenting on you right now. And I kind of feel like that's the truth. I feel like we don't have a great knowledge base of what these types of foods will do to our body. And so I started looking into it a little bit more because I had the general idea of what these things are, but I didn't have the exact details. So I think we've all probably seen those genetically modified labels on foods, but now we're starting to see something new. We're starting to see bioengineered on our foods. And so let me just quickly tell you, like a genetically modified food is something where you have an organism that's genetic material has been modified or altered in a lab setting by engineering. So they're either taking animal DNA, plant DNA, virus DNA, or bacteria DNA. Let me say those last two again. Virus DNA, bacteria DNA. Okay, so they're taking those things, putting them together to create the product that they want. Okay, that's a genetically modified organism. Now, we get into the bioengineered. What's the difference? Bioengineered basically is the same thing, but it has an exclusion. If you cannot detect that genetic material in the final product that you're grabbing off the grocery store shelf and bringing home to consume, then it does not require a bioengineered label. If you can detect the DNA, then they have to follow that disclosure law. So for instance, something like vegetable oil. Soybean oil or vegetable oil is so refined and so processed that by the time it makes it to the store shelf, the DNA is not detectable. So you're not going to see that bioengineered label on it. And that's the same with canola oil. Don't think you're safe buying that either. 90% of the crops of rapeseed that were grown in Canada were genetically modified. So that's another highly genetically modified crop. But because that DNA is not present in that canola oil, when you bring it home to your family, it's not required to follow that disclosure law. And remember, this isn't a labeling law, this is a disclosure law. And what that means is that they have a couple of ways to kind of follow this law. They can either put that little bioengineered label on it. They can say contains a bioengineered food ingredient. They can give you a phone number, a website, a QR code, a text line, basically any way that you would be able to go and find out for yourself if that food product had any bioengineered ingredients. So you really have to do the legwork on that. It's a little bit tricky, and I know that that's shocking considering that our food industry here in America is just so transparent. It's shocking that they would make it so difficult to find these things out. So don't think you're in the safe if you don't see something on your label. But because they estimate that 75% of the food on the grocery store shelves is bioengineered or genetically modified, I thought you might want to know a little bit more information about it. I thought it might be helpful when you go to make decisions on what you're going to bring home to your family. Let's just go over a few of these items, because honestly, if I'm consuming bacterial DNA or viral DNA or virus particles, or really whatever that is, I think that I would want to know. I mean, it's just real, just a thought. Maybe y'all want to know this too. Okay, so the number one is aspartame. Okay, so if you're like in my generation, you've heard of aspartame. It's that little sweetener that you get at the, restaurant tables and things like that. But you might be surprised to find that it is still in a lot of diet sodas. It's in your chewing gum. It is also in no sugar Jello. It's also in no sugar syrups, things like that. So you have to be really careful with that one. The EPA has actually said it's a neurotoxin, although the FDA doesn't necessarily agree with that. So that's kind of interesting. But, aspartame, when you ingest it, it actually breaks down into formaldehyde, which I believe is that liquid that they're using to preserve organs. If you're ever in a college class with anatomy or something like that, if you ever saw a brain or a liver or a kidney or something, formaldehyde's used to preserve those organs. So that's really interesting that we can consume that. But it's okay, because the World Health Organization says that you can consume up to 14 cans of diet soda a day and still be just fine. But if that's not enough for you, the Food and Drug Administration says that you can consume 25% more than that. So, just in case. But I feel a lot better knowing that that's been, marked as safe for us to consume. So that's number one on our list. Let's continue. The second one is corn. 93% of the crops grown in the United States that are corn are genetically modified. We all know that that's highly genetically modified. But what you may not consider is that although some of those corn crops are used to produce food that goes directly to the grocery store, a lot of that's used in your animal feed, like I mentioned earlier. So those animals are consuming that. Your meat, your dairy, your eggs, they're all consuming that, and then you're bringing that home and consuming it that way. Although, like I said, it's not going to be marked bioengineered because it doesn't contain a detectable amount of that DNA. Okay, so that's something to consider as well. The next one is sugar beets. So this one was kind of interesting because the other day, Vinny came down into the garden and said, "Hey Mom, I think we should grow sugar beets." And I said, well, that's highly genetically modified. And he said, no, it's not. I was reading a book called Little Britches, and he said they grew sugar beets way back in the day to feed their pigs. And I said, well, just because it wasn't genetically modified then doesn't mean that it isn't now. So sugar beets are used to make about 35% of the global sugar supply. So if you're bringing in granulated sugar or products that contain sugar, you need to really be careful with that, because sugar beets, are used to make sugar, but they don't compete well with weeds. And so what they've done is they've made that resistant to Roundup. So they can now douse those crops in Roundup as well as other things and get a great product and not have to worry about the weeds. The problem is that we're consuming that product and putting it into our bodies, and that's where the problem may come in down the road. So soy is the next one. We all know that soy is really highly genetically modified. 95% of the crops of soybeans grown in the United States were genetically modified. And so we did touch on that with that vegetable oil. And you may say to yourself, well, geez, we don't do soy sauce and we don't bring in soy milk and we really don't have any soy in our house. But have you thought about soy lecithin? That's an additive that's used in a lot of different processed foods. Okay, it's a byproduct when they refine the oil to make that vegetable oil, and they use it as an emulsifier in a lot of processed foods. And what they found is because it's a byproduct, it actually contains high levels of solvents, which are the chemicals used in that refining process, as well as high levels of pesticide. So I don't know about you, but I think I might be avoiding soy lecithin. So make sure you are careful when you're reading your ingredient labels. And then I just have a few other quick ones for you. Cornstarch, of course, made from corn, so that is highly GMO. This one makes me sad, ice cream. My kids ask for ice cream, and when I don't feel like making it homemade, or I just don't have the time, it's really hard to find an ice cream brand that does not say bioengineered ingredient on it. Basically everything, unless you're buying organic, has that on it from ice cream, from what I have seen in the stores. Another one that makes me really, really angry actually is infant formula. Infant formula is highly genetically modified, and I find that rather repulsive. The fact that our government thinks that it is okay to give that to our most vulnerable and most innocent part of our society. It's really quite sad. So yeah, infant formula, that's another one. The next one is vitamins. If they're not organic, and if they are synthetically made, then those are going to be genetically modified too. So if you're giving those little gummies to your kids, or you're taking a vitamin supplement, you might want to check that. They're really sneaky. They hide things everywhere in our food system. It's really, really unfortunate. Another one is, like we talked about before, of course, our animal products, our beef, our milk, our dairy products, and then there's squash. Wait, what? Squash? Yeah, squash. Squash is genetically modified. A lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is. It's kind of crazy to think that these foods, you think you stay in the produce section of your grocery store and you'll be safe from all this and you're feeding your family healthy foods, but not necessarily. And they even have just developed a genetically modified potato. It's a white russet potato, and if I'm not mistaken, they modified it so that when you cut that potato open, if you were to just leave it on your counter, it would not brown. We all know if you're preserving food, or even if you're just cooking food, maybe over the holidays, if you cut up those potatoes for mashed potatoes and you just leave them out in the air, they're going to start to brown. But this new genetically modified one will not turn brown. So to me, kind of a silly thing to be doing. They just really are messing with a lot of our foods that we as consumers would think are generally safe, and it's really sad. But anyways, guys, I just thought that that information would be useful for you. I hope that it was. If you guys have any more insight on this, or any other things that you want to talk about or advice to give, please leave that in the comments below. I'd love to know your thoughts on it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I'm going to have some more videos coming up soon. I've been so busy here that I have been really slacking on the videos. But while I was researching this whole thing on bioengineered foods, I came across something about seeds, and I had heard someone mention something about seed supply and maybe not being able to get seeds, and I thought, well, let me look that up. And I did, and as I was looking up that particular topic, I stumbled across something else. And just to give you a little tease on that, when I was talking about these crops that were resistant to Roundup, we all know that Monsanto used to own Roundup until they were bought out by Bayer, which is a pharmaceutical company, which I also found out owns a lot of something else. So stay tuned for that one. I think you guys will find that very interesting. It really opened my eyes to say, hey, this could be a really huge concern of ours in the near future. So stay tuned for that one, guys. But anyways, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.